Right now, America uses more electricity than ever before, and demand is skyrocketing, powered by AI and data centers that will soon need as much energy as 15 million homes. But just as our appetite explodes, nearly 90 gigawatts of coal and gas capacity are vanishing, and replacement projects cannot keep up. Experts warn rolling blackouts are now being mapped out. Not if, but when. The next blackout could be just 30 minutes away. How did our grid become this fragile? And will your home be left in the dark first? Electricity demand in the United States is accelerating at a pace not seen in decades. The Energy Information Administration projects that national consumption will grow from 4,097 terawatt-hours in 2024 to 4,283 terawatt-hours by 2026. That is a two-year jump of nearly 200 terawatt-hours, enough to power millions of homes. Growth rates now climb above 2.5% per year, a sharp break from the flat demand that defined the 2000s and the 2010s. The country's appetite for electricity is being driven by forces that did not exist even 5 years ago. Data centers, once a niche part of the grid, are now at the heart of the surge. AI workloads and cloud computing have transformed these facilities into power-hungry giants. Nationally, data centers are projected to consume the equivalent of 10 to 20 million homes' annual usage by 2026, depending on how fast AI is deployed. That is not a distant forecast. It is a shift already underway. Researchers tracking the sector point out that AI training runs at hyperscale data centers require enormous, around-the-clock energy flows. The nation's largest tech companies, Google, Microsoft, Meta, and Amazon, are racing to lock in power contracts, sometimes for hundreds of megawatts at a time. In some cases, a single new data center can draw as much power as a small city. But the story does not end with tech. Manufacturing is coming home too. The push to reshore factories means steel mills, chip fabs, and battery plants are adding industrial loads at rates not seen since the 1970s. The EIA estimates the commercial sector, led by data centers, will grow at 2.6% per year through 2026, while industrial demand climbs by 2.1%. Residential growth is slower, but even homes are adding new loads through heat pumps, electric vehicles, and more. A leading energy researcher puts it simply, we are seeing a convergence of AI, digital infrastructure, and industrial policy that is driving electricity demand higher than at any point in a generation. The grid was built for a different era. Underlying all of this is a hard reality. The grid's existing capacity was never designed for this kind of growth. These numbers are not just statistics. They represent a transformation in how and where America uses power. As the nation's demand curve bends upward, the question is no longer whether the grid can keep up, but how quickly it will fall behind. Clusters of new demand are reshaping the nation's power map. The resurgence of American manufacturing is not evenly spread. It is concentrating along key industrial corridors, like the Ohio River Valley, the Gulf Coast, and the Interstate 85 corridor. In these regions, steel mills, semiconductor fabs, battery plants, and chemical complexes are springing up, each drawing as much power as tens of thousands of homes. The Department of Energy latest corridor analysis shows that just 5 states, Texas, Georgia, Ohio, North Carolina, and Tennessee, account for nearly half of all new large-scale industrial load requests since 2022. Atlanta's metro area is now a magnet for both data centers and advanced manufacturing. In Forsyth County, a single battery plant coming online in 2025 will use more electricity than the entire county's residential sector. North of Dallas, a new semiconductor facility is projected to require 300 megawatts at full build-out, 3 times the power of the city's hospital network. Researchers tracking utility interconnection queues point to a pattern. The same regions attracting reshored factories are also where hyperscale data centers are clustering. These loads are not just large, they are persistent, running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In the Southeast, utility filings show industrial and commercial requests topping 10 gigawatts of new demand by 2026, with the Carolinas and Georgia leading the pack. The Midwest is seeing a similar surge. In Indiana and Ohio, steel and automotive plants are ramping up night shifts to meet demand, sometimes shifting production to off-peak hours to avoid grid constraints. The EIA regional breakdown confirms that industrial electricity use in the Midwest is growing at its fastest pace since the 1970s. Not all communities are feeling the impact equally. In some towns, the arrival of a new plant means a spike in local jobs and a doubling of the area's electricity needs almost overnight. For others, the arrival of a data center campus quietly transforms the local grid, pushing substations and transmission lines to their limits. A leading grid researcher explains that these hotspots are not isolated. They form a patchwork of high-stress zones stretching from Houston to Charlotte and from Columbus to Chattanooga. As manufacturing and digital infrastructure pile into the same regions, the pressure on the local grid intensifies. These clusters are where the first signs of strain are likely to appear, setting the stage for the regional supply deficits that follow. Across the country, the grid is losing more generating muscle than it is gaining. Coal and gas plants, many of them built decades ago, are shutting down at a pace that outstrips replacement. By the end of 2026, utilities are set to retire around 25 gigawatts of firm capacity, with another wave pushing the total to nearly 90 gigawatts by 2030. These are not just numbers on a spreadsheet. Every gigawatt retired is enough to power hundreds of thousands of homes. The closures are happening in clusters. Wisconsin's Oak Creek Station, Colorado's Hayden Plant, Kentucky's Mill Creek and Brown units, and Indiana's Rockport facility are all on the chopping block. Yet the new plants meant to fill the gap are not arriving on schedule. Supply chain bottlenecks have turned the procurement of key equipment like transformers and gas turbines into a waiting game that stretches 2 to 4 years. At Oak Creek, for example, the first replacement turbine will not be delivered until May 2026, pushing the plant's gas conversion into 2028. Across the Midwest, utilities are issuing requests for proposals, but the lead times for new generation are slipping further out. Even when replacements are approved, permitting and financing hurdles add months, sometimes years, to the timeline. Grid analysts warn that this backlog is not just a temporary blip. As environmental rules accelerate coal closures and manufacturers compete for the same limited pool of equipment, the net loss of capacity becomes more pronounced. In effect, the grid is shedding reliable megawatts faster than it can rebuild them. The result is a shrinking cushion between supply and demand, with each closure making the system more brittle. For grid operators, the math is unforgiving. The gap between what is disappearing and what is coming online is growing wider, and every delay increases the risk of shortages when the next heat wave or cold snap arrives. Reserve margins, the buffer between available power and peak demand, are shrinking across the country, and the risk is not evenly spread. In Texas, the ERCOT grid faces a summer 2026 reserve margin projected as low as 10%, according to the latest Capacity, Demand, and Reserves report. That number can dip further to 5 to 8% during extreme heat, or if renewables underperform. ERCOT's Chief Operations Officer warns that without new capacity or a break in demand growth, emergency measures may be needed during peak hours. For Texas, the difference between lights on and rolling outages could be a single heat wave away. The story is just as urgent in the Midwest. The Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, MISO, is watching a 15-gigawatt gap open up as coal plants retire faster than replacements arrive. MISO planning documents show reserve margins dropping to 12% or lower, with some southern Midwest zones facing only 10% in a bad summer. Grid planners in Indiana and Ohio point to delayed gas projects and supply chain logjams as the main culprits. Weekly 4-hour outages are now considered a real possibility if industrial and data center loads continue to climb. PJM Interconnection, which runs the grid for 13 states from Illinois to New Jersey, projects a base reserve margin of 14.7% for summer 2026. But in stress scenarios like a heat wave or solar underperformance, that cushion can shrink to just 8 to 10%. PJM officials confirm that demand from data centers is rising at more than 3% per year, and coal retirements are outpacing new solar by 5 gigawatts. Imports and scarcity pricing have already been triggered in recent summers. California's grid, managed by CAISO, faces its own crunch. Reserve margins could fall below 10% during a heat wave, especially with 5 gigawatts of gas plants set to retire, and surging demand from electric vehicles and data centers. In the Southeast, data center growth in Georgia, Virginia, and the Carolinas is outstripping new generation, with some subregions expecting margins as low as 8%. Operators across these hotspots are clear. The first blackouts will not be random. They will strike where the buffer is thinnest, and that is increasingly in the very places where economic growth is strongest. Summer 2026 stands out on every grid operator's calendar. 3 windows carry the highest risk. The June to September heat wave stretch, the height of hurricane season from August through October, and the deep winter heating months that follow. Each brings its own threat to the balance between supply and demand. Reliability assessments from ERCOT, PJM, and CAISO all point to the same reality. Peak demand is likely to outstrip available supply, especially when weather extremes hit. Operators are not relying on hope. Emergency playbooks are in place and the mechanics are precise. When reserves drop below critical thresholds, control rooms move fast. Official procedures call for public warnings as little as 10 to 30 minutes before rolling blackouts begin. These alerts arrive by text, app, or local news, with little time for households to react. The actual outages are planned to rotate, lasting anywhere from 1 to 6 hours at a time. In major events, 4 to 8 hours is within the range grid managers consider. Some regions, especially those in the Southeast and Midwest, could see these outages recur weekly during the hottest months. Not all electricity users are treated equally when the grid is under stress. Critical infrastructure such as hospitals, emergency services, and water treatment plants are at the top of the priority list. These facilities are shielded from the first rounds of load shedding. For most neighborhoods and small businesses, though, the lights go out first. The logic is simple: protect life and safety, then manage the rest. An ISO spokesperson puts it plainly. Our protocols are designed to give as much warning as possible, but the system can change in minutes. When reserves hit the threshold, we have to act. Emergency memos circulated in 2025 spell out the sequence. Identify non-critical circuits, dispatch automated controls, and rotate outages to avoid prolonged darkness in any one area. For households, that means the window to prepare can be measured in minutes, not hours. The clock is always ticking, and the margin for error is narrowing with each passing season. Locking in a fixed-rate electricity contract now can mean the difference between manageable bills and financial shock. Utilities across the country are quietly ending promotional rates, and households on variable plans could see costs spike 300% or more during supply crunches. Public Utility Commission filings show that in high-risk states, rate increases can happen with just a few days' notice. Community solar programs offer another layer of protection, but wait lists are growing fast. In some regions, there are already 3 applicants for every available slot, with new enrollments closing months before summer peaks. A program director in North Carolina confirms we are seeing more sign-ups in the last 6 months than in the previous 2 years combined. Time of use plans can also soften the blow, shifting heavy usage, laundry, electric vehicle charging, even dishwashers to off-peak hours can cut bills by up to 40%. But hardware is the next line of defense. Whole home generators now cost between $12,000 and $25,000 to install, and wait times are stretching to 6 months. Portable generators that can cover essentials like refrigeration and medical devices start at $1,200, but supplies run low quickly after each major outage. Battery backup systems, such as Tesla Powerwall alternatives, range from $8,000 to $15,000. Installers warn that demand is outpacing supply, and critical circuit-only setups can reduce costs by more than half. As one generator installer says, if you wait until the warnings start, you are already too late. For businesses facing the power crunch, survival means more than just keeping the lights on. It is about protecting revenue and reputation when the grid cannot be trusted. Demand response programs have become a lifeline. Commercial facilities that agree to reduce their power use during emergencies are now earning $500 to $5,000 per month, depending on their size and flexibility. One aggregator explains that contracts spell out exactly how much load must be shed and how quickly, with payments tied to verified performance. The trade-off is clear: some production pauses, but the payout can offset losses from forced downtime. Uninterruptible power supply systems are no longer optional for critical operations. Even a brief outage can corrupt files, disrupt transactions, or damage equipment. That is why more companies are signing generator contracts with service-level agreements that guarantee fuel delivery and rapid response. The fine print matters. Coverage gaps or delayed dispatch can mean hours of unplanned shutdowns. Insurance is also shifting. Standard business policies rarely cover losses from power failure unless specific riders are added. Claims adjusters recommend documenting every outage, tracking lost revenue, and saving receipts for spoiled inventory. After a major blackout, Small Business Administration disaster loans may be available, but only for those who can prove their losses. The businesses that weather the crunch will be those that treat resilience as a revenue stream and a shield, not just an expense. A single blackout can threaten more than comfort. It can put lives at risk. For families with young children, elderly relatives, or anyone relying on refrigerated medications or powered medical equipment, preparation is non-negotiable. A home health nurse in Houston keeps a checklist by the fridge. Doors stay closed and food stays safe for about 4 hours without power, up to 24 hours if packed with ice. For insulin and other temperature-sensitive medications, she partners with local pharmacies to secure dry ice and teaches patients how to store doses in small, insulated containers. Portable power banks and battery backups are now standard for critical devices like oxygen concentrators and CPAP machines. Efficiency upgrades can stretch precious hours. Mini-split air conditioners and smart thermostats with outage modes help maintain safe indoor temperatures, even when the grid is unstable. The Department of Energy's rebate programs make heat pump water heaters and LED lighting more affordable, reducing overall demand by up to 2/3 in some homes. These investments do not just pay off during emergencies, they cut bills year-round. But no amount of preparation can erase the financial strain ahead. An energy economist warns that electricity prices could climb 60 to 80% by 2027, with volatility lasting until at least 2030. The path to grid stability will be long, and the costs will be felt at every meter. For vulnerable households, the difference between hardship and resilience will come down to planning now before the next outage hits. Every outage is not just an inconvenience, it is a signal that the grid we rely on is no longer guaranteed. As demand outpaces supply, energy security becomes a daily decision, not a distant policy debate. 2026 marks the start of a new electricity era. The future of power now rests in your hands, your choices, your resilience.